The call came in on a Wednesday in August, and the dispatcher said it was one of those old walk-ups in Bloomfield, off Liberty. 3-story brick, no elevator. The kind of building where every hallway smells like fried onions and old carpet. Tenants had been complaining about scratching in the walls for weeks. Property manager finally decided to spend the money. I've been doing pest work in Pittsburgh for about 11 years. Mostly rats, mice, roaches, the occasional raccoon in an attic. That summer had been slow, so I took the job myself instead of sending one of the newer guys. The manager met me out front. His name was Ray, middle-aged, sweating through a Steelers polo even though it was only around 10 in the morning. He walked me through the ground floor units and up to the second floor, talking the whole way about how the owner didn't want to hear the word infestation, just monitoring. Second floor's the worst, Ray said. 3B and 3C in the back. Lady in 3B says she hears it every night around 1, 2 in the morning. Scratching, sometimes like something being dragged. Rats can drag things, I told him. Nesting materials, food. They'll haul cardboard around like it's a mattress. He nodded like he wanted that to be the answer. 3B was rented by a woman named Marta. She let me in without saying much. The apartment was tidy in that particular way older folks keep their places. Doilies on the arms of a beige couch, a wall clock ticking too loud, a picture of the Virgin Mary above the TV. She pointed at the far wall, the one that shared a border with the stairwell shaft. There, she said, behind the bookshelf. My husband, he passed 2 years, God rest him. He would have gone in with a hammer already. I told her I'd handle it without a hammer if I could. I pulled the shelf away from the wall a few feet. The baseboard looked normal. No droppings, no smear marks along the paint. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. Because if you have rats loud enough to bother a tenant nightly, you usually have grease trails along the run. Rats are creatures of habit. They use the same paths for months. You can practically map them. I set 2 snap traps in a bait station near the corner, wrote it up on my clipboard, and went across the hall to 3C. 3C was empty, being turned over between renters. Ray unlocked it and left me to work. Inside, the kitchen had that half-cleaned smell of bleach and something older underneath. I walked the perimeter and tapped the walls with the back of my flashlight. When I got to the interior wall behind the fridge, the sound changed. Not by much. A little more give, a little less density. Most people wouldn't have caught it. I checked the floor plan Ray had given me and compared it to the building. According to the plan, the 2 units shared a straight interior wall. But standing in the kitchen, tapping, I could tell there was more space in there than a normal partition should have. Old buildings in that part of Pittsburgh are strange. A lot of them were carved up from single-family homes in the 40s and 50s, and the renovations were done cheap. You get dead zones behind kitchens where a chimney used to run, chase spaces for pipes that were never pulled out. Sometimes an entire room got walled off because it was easier than dealing with a bad floor. I called Ray back up, told him I needed access. Access to what? He asked. To whatever's behind that wall. He rubbed the back of his neck. Said the owner wouldn't like cutting drywall unless we were sure. I told him I wouldn't cut anything if there was another way in. Then I went down to the basement. The basement of that building was a low, damp room with a concrete floor painted battleship gray, water heaters, an old boiler, a wall of tenant storage cages full of Christmas boxes and broken bikes. Along the north wall, behind the boiler, there was a plywood panel screwed into the studs. It didn't match anything else down there. The screws were newer. Someone had been in and out of it. I pulled my drill and took the panel off. Behind it was a crawl space opening, maybe 3 feet by 2. Cold air came out of it, moving. That was the second thing that caught me. Crawl spaces in Pittsburgh in August should be warm and stale. This one had airflow, which meant it connected to something with ventilation. I pointed my flashlight in. The passage went back about 6 feet and then turned upward, using the old chimney chase as a vertical shaft. There were nails hammered into the brick at regular intervals, not construction nails. Someone had put them there to climb. I sat back on my heels for a minute and thought about it. Standard practice when you find something like this is to call it in. Termite guys will do it. Roofers will do it. You spot structural weirdness, you tell the property manager, you get out. That's what I should have done. But rats will use vertical shafts, and a shaft like that, running all 3 floors, would explain scratching that moved between units. I wanted to at least see how far up it went. I clipped my flashlight to my belt loop, tested the first nail, and climbed. The chimney chase was tight. My shoulders scraped brick on both sides. Somewhere above me I could hear the building's plumbing. A toilet flushing 2 floors up, water rushing through copper pipe like a distant river. My flashlight beam bounced off soot-stained walls, and I kept my head down so I could see my footing. After maybe 12 feet, the chase opened sideways into a horizontal cavity between the 2nd and 3rd floors. A joist bay, but larger than it should have been. Someone had cut back the insulation, cleaned it out, and laid down a piece of plywood as a floor. I pulled myself in. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I saw, because when I tell this story to other guys in the trade, they always jump to the wrong conclusion. They picture something out of a horror movie. Bones, filth, writing on the walls. It wasn't like that. It was a room. Not a proper room. Maybe 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet tall at its highest point. But someone had made it a room. There was a shelf built out of scrap lumber, screwed into the studs, and on the shelf were canned goods, all the labels facing outward. Chef Boyardee, Bush's beans, tuna. A can opener sat on top of the stack. There was a folded wool blanket, army green, the kind you buy at surplus stores. A pillow in a clean white case. A small battery lantern, off, hung from a nail. A stack of paperback books, maybe 15 of them, arranged by size. I saw a Louis L'Amour on top, and underneath what looked like a King James Bible. There was a plastic jug of water, half full, a little plastic tub with a lid, and when I lifted the corner of it I saw folded clothes inside, socks, a t-shirt, all clean. Everything smelled like nothing. That was what got me. No smell of a body, no smell of waste. The space smelled like dust and cedar because someone had put a couple of those cedar blocks from a hardware store on the shelf, the kind you use in closets to keep moths out. I sat very still for a minute. Then I noticed the notebook. It was a composition book, black and white marbled, the kind you buy at CVS for $1. It was on top of the paperbacks. I didn't open it. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because I already understood, in a general way, what I was looking at, and I didn't need details to make it worse. Maybe because at that moment I heard a sound below me, a door closing on one of the lower floors, and I remembered I was inside somebody's home. Whoever they weren't there. That was clear. The blanket was folded. The lantern was off. If someone had been in that space in the last few hours, they had left it exactly the way I would leave my own bedroom before going out. I climbed back down. I put the plywood panel back on the basement wall, sank the screws, and stood in the boiler room for a long time. Ray came down asking how it was going. I told him I'd found the run, that it was rodents using the old chimney chase, that I'd baited the vertical shaft from below and set follow-up traps on each floor. I told him the noise would probably stop in a week or two. He looked relieved. He didn't ask any more questions. On the way out, I finished the traps in 3B in the empty unit, filled out my paperwork on the hood of my truck. Under findings, I wrote, evidence of rodent activity in shared wall cavities. Treated. Recommend follow-up in 14 days. I signed it, handed Ray his copy. I sat in the truck for a while after that. Then I drove 3 blocks up Liberty, parked at a gas station, and called the county from the payphone by the air pump. I didn't want it on my cell. I asked for the social services desk and told the woman on the other end that I had reason to believe someone was living in an unsafe situation at that address, and that they needed food and shelter, and probably some help beyond that. I said, please send somebody kind. I said, please don't send police first. She asked for my name and I said, I'd rather not. And she said, okay. And she thanked me, and that was that. I sent one of the younger guys back 2 weeks later for the recheck. He came back and said the traps were empty, no signs, all quiet. I asked him if anybody had been in the basement, moving things around. He said no, not that he could tell. I don't know what happened after my call. Sometimes I think about looking it up, seeing if there was ever anything in the paper. I never have. What I keep coming back to is the shelf. The cans lined up with the labels facing out. The books arranged by size. Somebody built a life in a space you couldn't stand up in, 4 feet from other people's kitchens, and kept it clean, kept it neat. Chose that over whatever was outside the walls for them. I've turned it over plenty of times, trying to decide if that's the saddest thing I've ever run into or something else entirely. I don't have a word for it. The thing about elective neurosurgery is that most of your day is boring on purpose. That's the goal. You want the boring version. You want the version where nobody in the room has an interesting story to tell at dinner. March 2021, Boston. One of the hospitals off Longwood. I won't say which. I was 5 years out of fellowship, and I had done this particular procedure, a left frontal meningioma resection, more times than I could count. The patient was in his 50s, insurance guy, small tumor, slow growing, textbook access. He'd been anxious in pre-op, cracked a joke about wanting a refund if he came out dumber. I remember his wife squeezing his hand in the hallway. We had 6 people in the room, me on the primary, a resident I'll call Priya, second year, sharp, quiet, scrub tech named Danny, who'd been doing this since before I finished med school, circulator named Marcy, anesthesia was Ravi, and his CRNA that day was a woman everyone called Bex. That was the room. That was who was there. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. We were maybe 90 minutes in. Craniotomy done, bone flap off, dura open. I was at the peel. It's slow work. Meningiomas are like putty stuck to the brain. You coax them, you don't yank. Music was on low, some 70s station Marcy liked. Danny handed me a Roton. I remember the click of the suction. That's what I remember most, that constant, soft hiss. Then the patient spoke. He spoke. Full voice. Not a groan, not a sigh. Words. Priya's on the left. Everyone froze. Ravi was the first to move. I could see him through the drape, reaching for the monitor, then for the patient's eyelids. I stopped moving because when a patient talks under general anesthesia, you stop moving and you don't breathe for a second. Because your first thought is you're operating on someone who is awake, and if you flinch, you're going to hurt them. The patient kept going. Danny is on my right. He's got a Fraser suction. It's the medium one, not the small one. Marcy is by the door. She just wrote something on a clipboard. He said it in a normal voice, a conversational voice, like he was describing what he was seeing on a security monitor. Marcy had, in fact, just written something on the clipboard. I heard the click of the pen a second before he said it. Numbers, Ravi said, very calm. Ravi is the calmest person I've ever worked with. He's under. SIVO's at 1.2. BIS is 38. Heart rate steady. He's not awake. BIS is the number the anesthesia team watches for depth of unconsciousness. Under 40 is deep. He was deep. He was, by every measurement we had, gone. The patient said, "Ravi's looking at the screen." Ravi looked up from the screen. I have to describe the way this felt because I want to be honest. It didn't feel supernatural. That's the wrong word. It felt like a mistake in the room, like something had been misfiled, like a phone call coming in on the wrong line. Priya's eyes went wide over her mask. I could see the skin above her cheeks go pale. Danny didn't move at all. He held the suction exactly where I needed it and just looked at me. He's 48, I think, and I've never seen him look uncertain about anything before or since. I said, quietly, "Keep going." I meant it to myself as much as to them. Because we had an open skull on the table and a piece of tumor still attached, and whatever this was, the only way through was to finish. You can't pause a craniotomy for a philosophical conversation. The patient said, "The Roton has a little scratch on the handle, near the grip." I looked at the Roton in my hand. There was a scratch near the grip, a tiny, bright line in the metal where something had scraped it. I had never noticed it before. I've held that instrument, or ones exactly like it, thousands of times. "Doctor," the patient said. He didn't use my name. He said, "Doctor." That was the only one he didn't name. "Your hands look steady from here." I don't remember what I did with my face. I remember I kept working. You keep working. That's the job. You put your questions in a box, and you close the lid, and you finish the case. "The left one is tired," he said. My left hand was tired. I'd been holding retraction for a long time with my left, and there was that specific ache in the meat of the thumb that I get. I had not said anything. I hadn't shifted my grip. I hadn't shaken it out. There was nothing on the outside of me that would have told anyone in that room, let alone the man on the table, that my left hand was tired. And then he stopped. That was the strange part, maybe the strangest part. He didn't trail off. He didn't sigh. He went quiet, the way a radio goes quiet when you turn the dial past a station. 1 second of voice, then air. Ravi ran his checks, twice. He looked at me over the drape and gave a small shake of the head that I understood to mean he had nothing. No spike, no lightning, no movement on the twitch monitor. The patient's face, what I could see of it around the tape, was slack in the way it should have been. We finished the case. It took another 2 hours. Nobody talked more than they had to. Danny handed me instruments before I asked. Priya's hands stayed steady, which impressed me then and impresses me now. Marcy did her counts. We closed the dura, replaced the bone flap, put the plates in, closed the scalp in layers, dressed him, wheeled him to PACU. I went and stood in the scrub room for a while after. I ran the water hotter than I needed to. Danny came in behind me, washed his hands next to mine, didn't say anything for maybe a full minute. "You heard that," he said, not a question. "Yeah." "Okay." He dried his hands and left. The patient woke up clean, neuro intact. He knew his name, the year, the president. He knew he was in a hospital in Boston. When I did my post-op check, he asked me if it had gone well, and I said yes, it had gone well, which was true. I asked him casually if he remembered anything, any dreams, any voices, anything from during the procedure. He looked at me the way people look at that question and said, "No, nothing." He went to sleep counting backwards, and then he was here. His wife was in the chair by the window on her phone. He asked when he could eat. That was the conversation. Ravi came to find me later that afternoon. He had the anesthesia record printed out. He'd gone over it twice with his attending. Sevoflurane concentrations, MAC values, BIS trend, end tidal CO2, the whole strip. He walked me through it. There was no window, he said. There was no point in the case where the depth of anesthesia was consistent with awareness. Not close. Not even a spike we could point at and argue about. "So what do we write?" I said. He'd already thought about it. He said the closest bucket in the literature was something called intraoperative vocalization, which is when a patient makes sounds under general anesthesia. It happens. It's usually groaning, occasionally a word. It's considered a curiosity. It doesn't mean the patient was aware. It doesn't mean anything, according to the papers. "He named everyone," I said. "I know," Ravi said. "I'm writing what I can write." The chart note went in as verbal activity under anesthesia, no medical significance. That's the phrase. I've read it 100 times since. It sits in the record between the intubation time and the extubation time like a piece of furniture nobody wants to move. I keep a journal, not a work journal, a personal one. My wife got it for me a long time ago when I was in residency and I was having trouble sleeping. I don't write in it often. That night I wrote 3 lines. He described my hands, said the left one was tired. It actually was. I hadn't said so out loud. I've done maybe 200 cases since then. I don't think about it every day. I think about it when I'm holding a Roton and I catch the scratch on the handle, which is still there, because instruments live longer than you'd think. I think about it when the room goes quiet at a certain point in a procedure and I can hear the suction and nothing else. I don't have an explanation. I've read the papers Ravi read. I've read some he didn't. There are theories about auditory processing under anesthesia, about how the brain assembles input when the higher functions are offline. None of them explain a man on a table describing a scratch on a tool he never saw, in a room he was not looking at, while his own skull was open. The patient did well. He's alive. He sent a card at Christmas that year, one of those pre-printed ones with a photo of his dog. He wrote, "Thank you," at the bottom in blue pen. I keep it in a drawer in my office. I told Danny once that I'd written it down. He nodded and said, "Good, someone should," and then he changed the subject to the Bruins. The building is on Fayette Street in Baltimore. 4 floors, brick front, one of those places nobody looks twice at when they walk past. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, 5 days a week, and for the first 2 months there was nothing to say about it. I did the rounds, sat at the desk in the lobby, watched the street through the glass. That was the job. I took it in October 2021 because my back went out and I couldn't keep loading trucks anymore. The guy who hired me, a supervisor named Rick, told me the building used to be an orphanage. He said it like a fun fact, the way people mention a haunted hotel on a road trip. Torn down in '83, new building went up 2 years later. Same footprint, more or less. I nodded. I didn't care. A paycheck is a paycheck. The first drawing showed up on a Tuesday night in early December. I remember because I had just come back from the vending machine on the 2nd floor, and I was heading up the stairwell to do the 3rd floor sweep. The 3rd floor is mostly accounting, a law firm, and a dentist's office at the far end. Carpeted hallway, off-white walls, that hum from the fluorescence that you stop hearing after a week. I turned the corner past the elevators, and there it was, about waist-high on the wall outside the accounting suite. A drawing in pencil, a house with a triangle roof, 2 windows, a door, and a stick figure standing next to it, holding what looked like a balloon. The kind of thing a kid would do in kindergarten. Not scribbled either, careful. The lines were pressed in, like whoever did it had taken their time. I stood there for a second. The building had been locked since 7. I had done the sweep at 10:30, and the wall was clean. I know because I always run my flashlight down that hallway, and I would have seen it. I took a photo with my phone. Then I did the rest of the floor, checked all the office doors, checked the stairwells, checked the roof access. Everything locked. In the morning, I told Rick. He came out with me and looked at it and made a face like he had bitten into something bad. He got a cleaning wipe from the janitor's closet and rubbed the wall until the drawing was gone. "Kids," he said. "Somebody must have brought their kid in during the day and didn't watch them." I said the wall was clean at 10:30. He said, "Maybe I missed it." I let it go. Second drawing showed up 3 nights later, Friday, different spot. This one was near the water fountain at the north end of the 3rd floor, a tree with round fruit on it, and under the tree, 4 stick figures holding hands. One of them was smaller than the others. Same pencil, same careful pressure on the lines. I called Rick at home. He wasn't happy about it. He told me to wipe it off and write it up in the log, and he would deal with it Monday. I wiped it off. The pencil didn't come off clean. There was a smudge left, gray, right where the trunk of the tree had been. For the next 2 weeks, it happened 3 or 4 times a week. Always the 3rd floor, always pencil, always the kind of drawing a 6 or 7-year-old would do. A cat, a car with square wheels, a woman in a triangle dress with her hair sticking up. Once, a long row of beds, 5 or 6 of them, with a stick figure lying in each one. That one bothered me, not because it was scary on its own, but because it looked like a memory, like whoever drew it was trying to remember something specific. I started checking the 3rd floor every hour instead of every 2. I would walk it, sweep the flashlight along both walls, and then go back down to the desk. Nothing. Then an hour later I would come up, and there would be a new one. Sometimes on a wall I had passed 4 minutes earlier on my way to the stairwell. I stopped sleeping right. I would get home at 6:30 in the morning, pull the blackout curtains, and lie there for an hour staring at the ceiling before I could go under. My girlfriend at the time, Marissa, asked me twice if I was okay. I told her the job was slow and I was fine. I didn't want to say the word orphanage out loud in our apartment. That sounds stupid now. At the time, it felt like the right call. I want to be honest here. I never thought it was a ghost. Not really. I grew up with a father who fixed HVAC systems for a living, and he had a way of talking about buildings that stuck with me. Buildings don't do things on their own, he used to say. Somebody is always doing something. You just haven't found them yet. That was the sentence in my head the whole time. But I couldn't find anybody, and that started to eat at me in a different way. Around the second week of December, Rick finally took it seriously. He came in one afternoon with a guy from a security company, and they mounted 3 small cameras on the 3rd floor, one at each end of the hallway and one over the elevator bank. Rick told me to keep doing my rounds like normal and not to change my behavior. He said it like he was reading from a checklist he had been given. That first night with the cameras up, nothing happened. Second night, nothing. I remember standing at the north end of the hallway around 2 in the morning, looking up at the little black lens over the water fountain, feeling stupid, feeling like I had made all of this up in my head. Third night, around 3:15, I heard something in the stairwell. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sound of a coat brushing against a wall. I keyed my radio and started moving. By the time I got to the 3rd floor, the hallway was empty. But on the wall by the accounting suite, right where the first drawing had been, there was a new one. A window with bars on it, and behind the bars, a face, round head, 2 dots for eyes, a straight line for a mouth. The pencil was still on the carpet. I picked it up. It was warm. Regular yellow Ticonderoga, chewed at the eraser end. I called Rick. He was there in 20 minutes with his coat over his pajamas. We went down to the security room together and pulled up the footage. The kid on the screen wasn't a kid. Or he was, technically, 15, 16 maybe, tall, skinny, dark hoodie, jeans. He came in through a service door on the east side of the ground floor, the one that leads to the boiler room. That door had a bad seal on it. We knew that. Maintenance had a work order on it going back to the summer. He had figured out you could pull it open from the outside if you leaned on the handle a certain way. On the footage, he walks up the back stairs like he has done it 100 times, goes straight to the 3rd floor, stops at the wall, takes a pencil out of his pocket, draws for maybe 90 seconds, steps back and looks at it, puts the pencil in his mouth for a second, thinking, then walks away. He doesn't rush. He doesn't look at the cameras. He doesn't act like somebody breaking in. He acts like somebody visiting a place. Rick called the police. They picked him up 2 nights later, coming through the same door. I wasn't there for that part. I got the story from Rick the next morning, over coffee in the lobby. The kid's name was Julian, 16, lived with his mother in Highlandtown. No record, no history of anything. Honor roll at his high school. His grandfather had been in the orphanage in the late 50s and early 60s, from about the time he was 5 until he aged out. The grandfather had died in August, cancer. Rick told me the cops brought Julian's mother in and they all had a long talk in a small room. And at the end of it, nobody wanted to charge him with anything. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't damaged anything that couldn't be wiped off with a rag. They told him to stay out of the building, and they let him go. I should have left it there, I know that. But about a week after that, I was leaving my shift on a Saturday morning, and I saw him, Julian. He was standing on the sidewalk across the street, hands in his jacket pockets, just looking up at the building, not doing anything, just looking. I crossed the street. I told him I was the guy who had been finding his drawings. He didn't run. He nodded like he had been expecting me at some point. I asked him what his grandfather had told him about the 3rd floor. He was quiet for a second. Then he started talking. He told me his grandfather had described the layout of the dormitory floor from memory, which window you could see the street from, which corner the sink had been in, where the older boys slept versus the younger ones. He told me his grandfather had a friend there, a smaller kid, who used to draw houses on scrap paper and hide them under his mattress because they weren't supposed to have paper in the dorm. That kid had gotten sick one winter and been sent somewhere else, and his grandfather never saw him again and never found out what happened to him. He told me his grandfather had made him promise, near the end, to go see the building, just to see it. He hadn't asked for the drawings. That part was Julian's idea. He said, "My grandpa remembered every inch of that floor. He talked about it more than he talked about the war, and he was in the war." I listened to all of it standing on the sidewalk. There was a bench 2 feet away. I didn't sit down on it. I don't know why. It felt wrong to sit. When he was done, I told him to take care of himself, and I walked to my car. I quit the job about a month later. It wasn't because of Julian. My back was getting worse, and the night shift was killing my sleep. But I think about that building sometimes. Not the drawings, the wall. Somebody built that wall over another wall that isn't there anymore. And a kid who was 5 years old in 1958 remembered where the sink used to be well enough to tell his grandson about it 60 years later.